today. Part of the University of Southern California declared a quote-unquote Gaza solidarity zone. And this, the scene at one point at the University of Texas. Police there making arrests. The governor even deciding to send in state troopers. And from the steps of Columbia University just hours ago, the House Speaker Mike Johnson said that school's president needs to go and that he would be speaking soon, he says, to the commander-in-chief.
Is not contained quickly, and if these threats and intimidation are not stopped, there is an appropriate time for the National Guard. We have to bring order to these campuses.
Tomorrow, President Biden will be in New York, the center of this week's anti-Israel protests. So, what should he do? What should he say? Should he head to campus? Come on in, I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. All right, come on in. Here we are. Here we go. Hanging out with us today, Chris Steyerwalt, host of The Hill Sunday and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. Kurt Bardella is a Democratic strategist, NewsNation contributor as well. And Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House chief of staff, NewsNation contributor. Hello to you all. Nice to have you all in. We continue to see all these protests taking place. It's almost like pick your school out of a hat at this point, and there's probably something going on. Columbia University, Chris, the House Speaker was there today meeting with Jewish students. President Biden will be in that area tomorrow for campaign stuff. What should the response be from the president when he is generally in that area tomorrow?
Well, not what it's been. Joe Biden has a tremendous opportunity here it's an overused phrase, sister soldier moment. He has a tremendous opportunity here to speak to the majority of Americans and say, unacceptable. This is unacceptable. I hear not to delegitimate the concerns about people and the suffering of civilians in Gaza and all of that, but to say this is flatly unacceptable, and the rotten, virulent presence of anti-Semitism, the rank anti-Semitism of some of these people is so profound that it delegitimates the larger message, and it's time for Biden to say it in no uncertain terms.
I heard that from Mike Johnson today.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that or anything really close from President Biden to what Mike Johnson said today.
Well, and you know, it's likely you're not going to,
Why?
at least not as strong, because there's political stakes for President Biden, whether you think that's right or wrong. Look, President Biden is trying to appeal to young Generation Z voters, many of whom agree with these protesters, and who are, you know, quite frankly, sitting in solidarity with a lot of these protests. You have that, and then also, this might seem unrelated, but it's not. President Biden signed legislation into law this week that would either ban or force the sale of TikTok. That's something that a lot of Gen Z voters
We're going to get there in a second.
Yes.
I promise you that. So, Mick, the House Speaker Mike Johnson today talked about threatening federal funding at these universities if we continue to see that.
I think everything's on the table. We talked briefly about it last night with one of the members of Congress about whether or not Congress might start looking at taxing the endowments. There's a bunch of different ways the federal government can get at these schools. Keep in mind, these schools have been taking a lot of federal money for a long time without much oversight from the federal government. That may well end. I mean, I can only imagine what a Donald Trump presidency would mean to these schools.
What would it mean? What do you think it would mean?
The endowments will absolutely be taxed. There's no question. They would try and find a way to do it without doing legislation. That this is how they're going to get them.
By sidestepping.
You go after the money on these particular organizations. When did things change at MIT? When donors stopped. When will things change at Columbia? When the federal funds get turned off or when taxes go up. That's how you impact these places.
I think President Biden needs to remember that part of the audience he needs to be thinking about are the parents of all students. I was talking today to a father whose son goes to school very nearby in New York, who is horrified at what is happening. And this is a left-wing Democrat, as liberal as it gets, and he is horrified at what is happening. He is Jewish. He believes that he and his family and his son are not safe, that they are under attack, and that there needs to be presidential leadership calling it out. For this moment in time, forget about the TikTok kids. Think about the parents right now who has watched their kids suffer through COVID, not be able to walk with their classes and graduations normally, who are about to walk in the next couple of weeks and might have to deal with this derailing yet another graduation. They're very, very upset.
You know, there was this letter last night that was put out by the Columbia University president. Those, by the way, are live pictures right now, New York City, Columbia University. Here's what the president said. Quote, for several days, a small group of faculty, administrators, and university senators have been in dialogue with student organizers to discuss the basis for dismantling the encampment, dispersing, and following university policies going forward. Can somebody explain to me how the university president is negotiating with students?
That's why this is happening. The inmates are running these sites. One of the worst statements I've ever seen.
I read that last night.
In history.
Google, we saw, I don't mean to cut you off, but Google, we saw protests at Google. You know what Sundar Pichai did?
Gone.
Bang, see you, you're out of here. This is a private campus, a private facility, however you want to describe it. And the CEO's, essentially the CEO, the president, whatever you want to label him, is negotiating with the kids.
Yeah.
The difference between free speech and academic freedom, we forget. Academic freedom, the freedom to say things, to express yourself, to follow unpopular opinions, to express unpopular opinions is crucially important for the academy. It is crucially important in higher education that people can hold unpopular opinions and they can defend them and they can research them and they can talk about them. Free speech, these students have rights as Americans to free speech, but they do not have rights as Columbia University students to free speech, and they can be suspended, they can be expelled, they can be kicked off campus when they are interfering with their fellow students. And there's a madness to this that I can't fathom.
Well, in the absence of leadership is why we're seeing this spread everywhere else, because right now there's no deterrent for anyone to go, oh, well, look what happened to Columbia. We shouldn't do this. Nothing's happening, so they're going to keep doing it.
Julia's right about what the thinking inside the Biden campaign is, like, oh, we don't want to upset these young people. There's a lot more meat on the bone on the other side with suburban parents. Go over there. Take a chance with the young people and say, you know what, you're not going to like what I'm about to say, but take a bath, go home, stop doing what you're doing, because he will get a lot more out of the kind of voters that you're talking about.
I'll give you the last word here.
You know, a lot of this reminds me of the Vietnam War in many ways. I mean, obviously, I was not around for the Vietnam War, but we saw campus protests really spread then, and colleges really struggled to contain it. It doesn't surprise me that we're seeing these protests. I mean, I think academia for quite some time has been, you know, especially in colleges, has leaned more towards the pro-Palestinian side of the spectrum. So it doesn't surprise me that colleges are afraid to touch this issue. But now I think we've gotten to a breaking point.
Who did America elect in 1968 and 1972? Law and order.
Good point.
Let's see how that plays out. All right. President Biden, meantime, signed the foreign aid bills totaling some $95 billion into law today. And afterwards, he spoke to reporters, addressed the media, touting the legislation. It was a speech that totaled 1,759 words. But one word was missing from his remarks: TikTok. Lawmakers, by the way, overwhelmingly put a bill on the president's desk, which he also signed today, that forces ByteDance, the Chinese company that owns TikTok, to sell within 9 months or face a ban in the United States in a year's time. Now, TikTok says half of the United States, roughly 170 million people all across this country, use its app. Its CEO today took to the platform to essentially say, see you in court.
Freedom of expression on TikTok reflects the same American values that make the United States a beacon of freedom. The facts and the Constitution are on our side, and we expect to prevail again.
All right, Jesse Weber, come on in, NewsNation legal contributor. Jesse, what is going to happen next here? Is this headed to the Supreme Court? I mean, you've got overwhelming bipartisan legislation on one side, and then TikTok used by half of the country on the other. Is this headed to the high court?
I can't imagine it won't. But first, the first thing that's going to happen is TikTok is going to ask a court to issue an injunction to stop this from going into effect. And I think they have a really good argument to say if that doesn't happen, there's going to be immediate harm to a number of people, businesses, content creators. But over to the substantive issue, yes, they're going to make the argument that this is a First Amendment violation. Courts generally are not too keen on blanket restrictions on speech. However, Blake, I will tell you, I think the government has a stronger stronger argument here, because this is not necessarily banning TikTok because of the speech on the platform. No, they're banning it because of the conduct of the owner. And the more they can stress national security interests, which we know time and again have trumped First Amendment rights, they might have a winning argument. And let me just tell you this. If ByteDance chooses not to sell the company, does that not in a way reinforce the government's claim that this is owned by China, that never wanted to sell this app in the first place? So I think the government is in a better position to argue this right now than TikTok.
So I called Jesse today, and I said, Jesse, what are your thoughts on all this? Jesse's smiling because he knows what I'm about to say. I said, Jesse, if I give you $10 million if you win the case, which side do you want to be on? And you know what Jesse did?
Take the government all day long.
He sighed. He went, and then about 10 seconds later, Jesse said, the government.
Sure.
To Mick's point.
Well, I did that because I thought for a second, does Blake actually have the $10 million to give me? And it made me sad that I don't think that was a real question. That's why I was sad.
But now that I listened to you, it seems like you're even more convinced, and so is Mulvaney, that, by the way, Harvard-trained attorney, that's the winning side, you think?
Oh, yeah, I didn't know if you were going to Mick on that. Yeah, no, I do. Look, the TikTok will raise issues that say, is this really the only option here? Because if they're worried about data security, sure. If TikTok's sold, couldn't China get our data in other ways? Yes. But that's why I think you stress a little bit more that it's not just about the data collection. It is about using an app that is so influential and powerful to essentially manipulate the U.S. society, elections, the economy. There's a greater danger here, and I believe that when you look at the history and you look at the case law, it would side for the government here over TikTok. I understand the concerns, and I understand this would affect a number of people's lives, but remember, this is not an outright ban. This is a choice to sell it to another buyer right now. So it doesn't mean it's the end of TikTok tomorrow. It just means that there might be new ownership.
All right. By the way, did you take exception?
We published Pravda in English in the United States when the Soviet Union was trying to wipe the United States off the face.
Yeah, but that's not. I'm sorry, but that's not what this issue is about. We're not limiting anything that TikTok is saying. We're limiting the algorithms that they take. When we publish Pravda in English,
I know. I understand that part. What I'm saying is, if the Chinese want to propagandize the United States, the people of the United States have a right to be propagandized too.
Right.
The freedom of speech is also freedom to hear. You can also you have a freedom to hear what you want to hear and have put in front of you. The infantilization of the American public that, we're going to be, the algorithms are going to change our brains and we're going to do things differently. We have to treat Americans as what we are, which is self-governing human beings who can choose their own media inputs.
I don't think that's where this is from. It might be from some lawmakers, and I get that argument, but my point is from a national security standpoint, it's what do they get? What else do they get out of my phone?
Yeah.
That's the issue. It's not, what am I reading? And yes, I'm able to discern maybe if I'm a good citizen between what's right and wrong and fake news and whatever, but do they also have my financial information off my phone because they're in the system?
And I assume the fight is going to be about how narrowly tailored this can be.
Sure.
Because if you're going to disrupt people's First Amendment rights, and you guys are 100% right, which is, if there's a national security concern, we do abridge people's First Amendment rights all the time. That happens frequently. Then the courts are going to want to know how narrowly can we tailor this so that we disrupt First Amendment speech the least.
So let me ask you. So let's just say the court does come down on the government side, like Jesse says, like Mick says. TikTok's then got to do something.
Yeah.
They'd have to sell. Who's going to buy this?
Well, it all depends if the algorithm goes with them in that sale. I mean, that's one of the things that the parent company is saying. Well, if we sell, we're not letting you actually have the TikTok algorithm. At that point, what you sell is kind of useless in terms of the application going forward. Yeah. I do want to point out, too, I find it a little rich that the CEO of this company is talking about American values
and the
Constitution.
Yeah,
wait, what are you talking about?
He was kind of like taunting there. Like it was like a taunt with a smile.
I'll take all the fair weather friends. The Constitution needs all the fair weather friends it can get. I don't care if people are not consistent on it. Come join us. Join the party over here under the spreading branches of our great Constitution.
Steve Mnuchin end up buying this?
He's on the list for sure, as is Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, a friend of the show.
Yeah. Blake's got $10 million.
I wish.
But the sigh from Jesse earlier today was,
Well,
it was deep.
let me just end this real quick, just to go back to real quick. Imagine you have a bookstore, and this is a famous Supreme Court case where the court says this bookstore is engaging in illegal conduct. They shut down the bookstore. It's not because of the books. It's not because of what was published. It was because of the conduct of the owner. So it has an incidental effect on speech for sure, but it's not so much about the speech. I think that's a way to look at it. Yeah.
Jesse was awake during con law class. That's
Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor. Jesse, thank you, sir. Talk to you soon. Still come from the Hill here over the next 45 minutes. What is a loyalty czar? Does Donald Trump have them? What Mulvaney is hearing and thinking. Hot mic with Mitt coming up. Plus, did the state of Pennsylvania just deliver a major warning sign to the top 2 presidential candidates? And how about this question? Could Robert F. Kennedy Jr. hit, let's say, 500,000 votes potentially there? And on the other side of the break, Steyerwalt breaks down what?
Your tease was so good. I want to know what
you looked up at the prompter.
Whoa, okay, well, that's going to be good. What if people don't care about foreign policy in elections typically, but what do they care most about? What do they care least about? What are the partisan divisions there? How will it affect the election? We'll talk about it.
Steyerwalt breaks it down on the other side of the break. You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation. All right, welcome back here to The Hill. So President Biden today acted on some of his international priorities. Now there are some new numbers out showing what are Americans' top foreign policy priorities. Steyerwalt is here to break it all down. Chris?
So let's start with the presupposition American voters don't care about foreign policy.
Okay.
They would rather, no, here's a nicer way to say it. American voters would rather not care about foreign policy. They'd rather care about what's going on in their communities. And the disparate numbers between people who want domestic priorities versus international priorities, it's 70 points. It's not even close. But when they have to care, when they are forced to care, they do have preferences. So here's your first magical graphic. Americans' top long-range foreign policy goals. So this is where we have broad consensus. Americans still are against terrorism. That's good. We're against illegal drugs. We're against the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And by a somewhat smaller majority, to maintain America's position as the global apex power. Okay, that's where they agree. Where do they disagree? And they also agree on this. This is what they don't care about. These are the things that had low numbers for what Americans said when the Pew Research Center asked people, okay, here's a list of 21 things. Which of these things do you think should be top priorities and which of these things do you not? These are numbers. These are the percentage of people who said, not a priority. I don't care about Israel, don't care about promoting democracy, don't care about Ukraine as a top priority. Now, if you peel that back and look at the partisanship underneath, what do you see there? Yes. Okay. Democrats, not surprising, are substantially more supportive of Ukraine, but not by a huge margin. They are substantially more supportive of Ukraine. But look at those Israel numbers.
Wow.
That's a 31-point delta on support for Israel between Republicans and Democrats. Now, when you see these numbers, this explains it all. Why is Joe Biden saying the things that Joe Biden is saying? Why did Donald Trump cave in and eventually let Mike Johnson run a funding package on Ukraine? Well, you see it here. The delta's not so big for Republicans on Ukraine. There's a little wiggle room there. On Israel, that's a tough one. All right, so here's a couple others that won't surprise you. Climate change, 70% of Democrats, yes, they want climate change to be a priority. 15% of Republicans. Those are all the California Republicans are there. And then protect the U.S. from terrorist attack, 67% to 83%. Now, this tells you something about Democrats' emphasis on the issue, where you can still have this substantial gap on this question between the two parties. And this explains it all about who's sucking up to who in Congress and on the campaign trail and all that stuff.
Steyerwalt breaks it down.
Quick question for the guru at the end of the table, or near the end of the table.
Yeah, near. Thanks for clarifying that.
Having said all that, if I'm right on an issue on foreign policy, if I'm wrong on an issue on foreign policy, does it change voters' behavior?
Calvin Coolidge, my favorite president of the 20th century, said, I have never had any political strategy other than to try to do the right thing and to sometimes succeed. And I think what happens in politics very often is people get so poll-driven. Americans don't think about that stuff. They don't think about on a day. People are not on a day in, day out basis saying, how much do I care about nuclear proliferation? Well, they care a lot more about it if one goes off in the Kashmir region, right? So when it comes to foreign policy, the verdict of the ages is to if we're quoting presidents, how about Andrew Jackson? One man with courage makes a majority. What you have to do is basically say, this is what I believe in. That's what Ronald Reagan did. That's what George H.W. Bush did. That's what successful foreign policy presidents do.
But if I'm a voter and I like your stance on foreign policy, but don't like your stance on the economy.
No. Nope. That's a no. That's a negatory.
Yeah. So hold on. I want to look at this for a second. I want to go back in it because something protect U.S. from terrorist attacks. That number 20 years after 9/11, 67%.
What are the other?
And 83%. Yeah. Who's against that?
So this is the triggering of when a lot of this stuff is code word language, right?
Okay.
So when a progressive hears how should it be a serious issue to protect the U.S. from terrorist attacks, what are they also hearing? They're hearing watch lists, they're hearing anti-Arab discrimination, they're hearing those other things that go into it. Look at the Israel number, right? When you say only 8% of Democrats said that supporting Israel should be a top priority for long-term U.S. foreign policy, that's not unrelated to the lower number on protecting the U.S. from terrorist attacks.
All right. Still much more ahead here on the Hill, including something that might give voters a pause.
Imagine what we can do next. 4 more years. Pause. 4 more years.
Oh, God. So what did you hear there? Chris, Julia, Kurt, and Mick weigh in. You are watching The Hill here on NewsNation. Stay with us.
Oof.
All right, welcome back here to The Hill. Would you take a look at this? Venezuelan migrants on mopeds zipping throughout the streets of some major cities to deliver food. Now, the Washington Post reports there is a, quote, not so underground economy, end quote, in parts of the town here in Washington as Venezuelan migrants without work permits rent out their friends' or families' accounts for a fee, the Post reports somewhere around $100, $150 a week, and make money as delivery drivers.
That's my street. They're on my street.
Is that your street?
Yeah, that's like in my neighborhood. Thumbs down.
Why? It's probably your order. Thumbs down?
Yeah, exactly. I'm a hypocrite because I'm contributing to the problem by ordering copious amounts of meat to be delivered to my home on mopeds. I get it. But these things are menaces. The mopeds? It is a real problem in traffic. They don't obey traffic laws. They're everywhere. They're in intersections. Sometimes they act like pedestrians. Sometimes they act like vehicles. They're very dangerous out there. And, D.C., we're spoiled because we don't have to live like other big cities do because we have a federal government here. We have a beautiful city and we have all that stuff.
Look at that.
This is a big city problem that has come to our city.
What do you see there, Julia?
Look, I agree with Chris on the mopeds, and I feel the same way about scooters, too. My goodness. But,
death penalty.
Look, it doesn't surprise me that there is this sort of underground economy happening here. I think a lot of these migrants, it was just, they have to make money. They have to make a living, and this is how they're doing it. And if they're not coming here legally, well, they're going to do it this way.
What about, part of the reason why this economy is moving along the way it is one, government spending that's moving its way through the system, but two, immigration. These are folks working, delivering food to people's homes or businesses or whatever, to Chris Steyerwalt. And if that delivery driver doesn't happen, then the business doesn't make money. Yeah. I don't know. Is that one side of the argument or no?
Yeah, I see people doing the jobs that Americans won't do when I look at this. And I don't blame, it's not their fault in terms of the mopeds, that's just how the system works there. Someone would be trying to have that job in delivering these things, whether it's a migrant or not. So it's not a migrant issue.
Isn't it illegal? Are they licensed? Do they have,
the mopeds are, I believe, registered.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever asked their Uber Eats driver, are you supposed to be doing this?
all I want to say is whoever's bringing my order tonight, disregard everything I said.
What do you see there, Mulvaney?
I see three things. This is it's an insight into the upside of immigration, which is that folks come here who want to work. It's not showing the downside, especially of illegal immigration, which is folks who come into the country who don't want to work and are here to do things to harm us. And number three, it's Stirewalt's fault.
Yeah, no, stipulate, for sure. I want it both ways.
Well, also in Washington today, President Biden appears to have made a bit of a gaffe while reading from a teleprompter. Listen.
Imagine what we can do next. 4 more years. Pause. 4 more years. 4 more years. 4 more years.
What'd you hear there?
I hear Ron Burgundy. You say classy, San Diego? So, yeah, that's for folks who didn't hear it. What he said is pause, because that was what on the teleprompter. And oftentimes you'll put something on a teleprompter where the speech is in one text, and then there's a direction to the speaker to stop and wait for applause. And that's what the president read, unfortunately.
George H.W. Bush very famously also read the stage directions. Message, I care.
What'd you hear there, Julia?
Well, I mean, look, it's an easy mistake for anyone to make if anyone's ever read prompter. It happens.
Not easy, I'll tell you.
But I can hear Republican operatives and, press operatives clipping this tape for potential future ads or clips online.
I think they may want to be careful about doing that. There are guys falling asleep in court every day.
Okay.
Fair.
All right, there you go, the president from earlier today. By the way, it is perhaps the key state in the 2024 election. And there are some new warning signs now for both President Biden and Donald Trump. Nikki Haley, remember her candidacy? She's been out of the race since early March. She won 16% of the votes, 16%. In the Pennsylvania Republican primary held just yesterday. And for the president, the lesser-known candidate, Dean Phillips, who also dropped out in March, received 7% of the votes, while write-ins have accounted for 6% of the votes so far. So here's what got me thinking with all of this. If that's what we're seeing last night, and if RFK Jr. gets on the ballot, is he going to hit 1 million votes in Pennsylvania? Is he going to hit 500,000 votes? What's his number going to be if that's what we saw in the primary?
I don't think there's much Nikki Haley, RFK Jr. crossover.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think there's much of that, nor do I think there's much crossover between discount liquor heir Dean Phillips and RFK Jr. Now, those uncommitted folks, yes, some of them, and actually maybe some of the folks who voted for Trump. What struck me, so I looked at the numbers. I went back. I said, all right, how does this turnout compare to other quadrennial elections? And I got to tell you, it wasn't as big as 2020, but there was nothing else on the ballot. The Attorney General's race is the only statewide race in Pennsylvania this year, other than the presidency.
I thought it was a Senate race.
Well, right. That wasn't already settled. Both the Senate candidates were uncontested.
Oh, yeah, the primaries.
Yeah, the primaries all done. You had a lightly contested primary for Attorney General, and that was it. And they still had, it was 980,000 Republicans turned out to vote. And I find that remarkable. I'd be less worried if I was Biden. You couldn't get more than 93% of people to vote for puppies and rainbows. There's just
we just saw that with terrorism in your breakdown.
There's 6% is always going to be no, I'd rather not. But that's 16%. And here's to dovetail with what we were talking about at the beginning. Those Nikki Haley voters, that's 16% of the Pennsylvania electorate. Joe Biden needs to every day think, what am I doing to get those folks who live in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, who live in Washington County, Pennsylvania? How do I convince those folks that I am an okay, safe place to park their votes? And a good way to do that would be to speak in no uncertain terms. And by the way, the Democratic senator and governor of Pennsylvania have both been on message and correct about this, about tough on anti-Semitism, standing up for Israel. That works in Pennsylvania. Joe Biden should mimic that.
Very quickly, can we bring the graphic back up from the Democrat primary results? Because this is what worries me about Pennsylvania. How long did it take them to decide their winner the last time around?
A week.
Okay.
It was the
if you
longest
bring up
week
the
of my
numbers
life.
again real quickly, what are you going to see on the Democrat results? That adds up to 106%. Okay, so I'm a little concerned about how Pennsylvania is counting votes.
You may be calling out the graphics department.
Yeah,
Nick. I don't know.
I'm doing the math.
Cool. Former OMB director.
Just sort of jumped out at me.
Mick's coming to audit the graphics department, so be ready.
You know, Chris, on that question about anti-Semitism and how the response to that in Pennsylvania, I thought it was interesting because Summer Lee, the incumbent congresswoman from a Pittsburgh area district, she was getting a lot of backlash for her stance on the Israel-Hamas war, and she got a primary challenger in Bhavani Patel. And I think it was always going to be a long shot for this challenger. But the fact that Lee was able to survive this for this time maybe says something about that issue going forward.
And was it close?
I don't think it was terribly
it wasn't.
close.
It wasn't close at all.
No.
I think the opposite is true of what Chris said, that just as this shows that Biden needs to reach out to the Haley voters every day and message them, I think it also shows that Trump's campaign has failed to do the same thing in terms of trying to get them back into the fold in some way.
Sure. I mean, 16%, Mick, that's 1 in 6, 1 in 7. Yeah. That's a big number.
It's going to be this race is about trying to get your people to come home. There are no people in the middle. I know Chris may disagree with me a little bit on that, but I don't think I think we agree there's not the typical number of swing voters.
Right, it's 5%.
In the middle. It's 5%. You win this race if the people who are supposed to vote for you vote for you. Do Republicans come home and vote for Trump? Do Democrats come home and vote for Biden? That's why you're not seeing a lot of crossover. They're worried about getting their own people, not picking somebody else up.
If you're running Trump's campaign, like, what's your message to Nikki Haley voters who haven't been with you, who still are kind of protesting? How do you get them back?
That's an easy message. Just play the video of Joe Biden again and again and again and say, this is what you get if you don't vote for Donald Trump. And by the way, that's the same thing the Biden people are going to be saying to their folks to get them.
They don't cast a vote for Kennedy instead?
All those Palestinian Americans in Michigan, it's like, okay, you don't like me, but look at what you get with Donald Trump. Yeah. That's what this is about.
But Blake is 100% right.
Oh, tell me.
That in Pennsylvania, there is a substantial RFK constituency. Yep. It's not reflected in those numbers, but it's going to be, in Pennsylvania, you got the T. So you got Pittsburgh, you got Philadelphia, and then you have the T, which is very rural, very Republican, and probably a lot of those working class, non-college white voters are going to be in the sweet spot for.
That's why it's not enough to say.
Really? That's
why it's not enough to say Trump is bad or Biden is bad, because each other might go for Kennedy instead.
I thought you were going to go to the housewife. The suburban housewife was the Kennedy person, the well-educated white vote. You think it's the rural poor?
It is people who are higher propensity voters who were part of the shift that we saw from 2012 to 2016 of white working class voters who moved over, right, that came into the Republican Party in substantial numbers. And it wasn't just that Trump brought them in, though he brought a lot of them in. The non-college white voters around the country, Trump was very effective in bringing them in. But they had been migrating away from the Democratic Party and toward the Republican Party. If you look at how hard it was for Barack Obama to put away the Democratic nomination and how well Hillary Clinton did in Pennsylvania in 2008, this is a long-standing thing.
So last night, Nikki Haley, 157,000 votes. Dean Phillips, 68,000 votes. Write-in, 58,000 votes. Back of the envelope math there. That's 280,000 votes, give or take. That is a lot when you add it up. 2016, there were like 6 million votes in Pennsylvania. 2020, 6.8. If RFK Jr. gets 10%, double basically what was in the primary last night, you're talking maybe north of 500,000.
Again, it depends on who he's pulling from, not what his numbers are.
All right. Still to come here from the Hill, that guy right there. Hot mic with Mick.
Where's my mic?
What are you talking about?
I've got no idea.
Loyalty czars.
Loyalty czars in South Carolina.
Your state of South Carolina. I saw a story today about loyalty czars, and I thought to myself, what on earth is a loyalty czar? I have never heard that title before.
I'm happy to talk about it.
Hot mic with Mick on the other side.
Please, Mr. Mulvaney.
By the way, we have been doing this stuff for exactly 1 year. This is a year of the Hill here on NewsNation. We'll show you where we started and where we've come on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
NewsNation tonight, a Banfield exclusive. A Nevada family claims aliens crashed into their backyard. Now they're breaking their silence with new details on strange paranormal activity. And see the video that experts say proves it's true. Banfield tonight, only on NewsNation.
Chess club president in high school.
There you go. We'll get that in the script next go around. Starting with the Trump campaign, Axios is reporting the Trump brothers, Don Jr. and Eric, have become key players in the transition team, playing the roles of quote-unquote loyalty czars. Mick, I saw that headline, and what's a loyalty czar? What's going on here?
Axios hates the president. That's what this is. It's somebody that he trusts who's involved with the vetting of candidates. I mean, I guess if you're going to use that description, every administration has a loyalty czar. So I don't like the headline at all. I don't disagree with it. I think Donald Trump is going to run his next administration, should he win, the same way he did the first, and the same way he ran his business. It's a family business. It's a small business. There's not a lot of hierarchy in the Trump organization, and I mean that business-wise or in the White House. Usually it's president, chief of staff, cabinet, everybody down. With Donald Trump, it's the president and everybody else.
So last time Jared Kushner, son-in-law, went to the White House, he's ruled that out. Do you think either of the kids would go into a White House?
Not in the same way that Jared did, because they still have to run the business.
Right.
I mean, they still have the Trump organization, and you sort of get I sort of get the feeling that Jared and Ivanka are off doing their own thing now, and that's fine. That's great for them. At some point you have to wonder if that draw to power is just too much, and people say, well, you know what, Dad, maybe I will come in now, or Jared calls up and says, well, you've clearly got a problem. Let me help you fix it. So you can see that sort of dynamic, but this is a family business, so it doesn't at all surprise me that he's putting family in various high-ranking positions.
All right, so before he can worry about a transition team, potentially, Trump, of course, would have to win. A new poll from Bloomberg and Morning Consult shows him leading President Biden in 6 out of 7 swing states. Now, that's strength in part driven by voters' pessimism around the economy, with over half of respondents saying they think the economy will get worse by the end of the year. Only 23% think it will get better. What's going on here?
Keep in mind, I mean, I think it's going to get worse because I follow the economic data. I follow the Fed Reserve. Most people don't do that, right? When most people answer that question, they're answering that question for themselves, which is, I think my situation is going to get worse in the next X time period, okay? And right or wrong, it's what they really believe. And Steyerwalt has said this a dozen times, and every time he says it, I'm like, he's absolutely right. This is not something that gets to be done by November. If it's not fixed by July, if that number doesn't get better by July, then Biden loses on the economy and probably loses the election.
What happens, Kurt, if those numbers are right? How does your guy overcome that?
I think the only chance he'll have in that scenario is if Republicans go so full tilt extreme, especially on abortion, that they drive away the largest constituency of voters in America, which is the female vote, the women vote. And that's kind of what we have seen play out in almost every election since Roe was overturned. So elections that Republicans should have won handily, they have either barely skated by or have outright lost. Turnout has not been what it should have been, and their rhetoric and extreme policies have incited the very constituency they need to win.
So what he's saying is we need to hire the Raging Cajun, James Carville, to remind everybody that it's the economy stupid.
I saw you nodding along.
No, I agree. I mean, look, I think last major election cycle, 2022, we thought it was going to be crime. Also, the economy, we saw inflation ticking up. But that was right in the shadow of Roe versus Wade being overturned. I would say that, if we're a few months ago, I would say that the economy might trump all of this, no pun intended. But I think a lot of these abortion measures we're seeing in Arizona, for example, or in Florida, I think that could help gin up turnout for Democrats, which benefits them.
Okay.
Just to say, yeah, it's abortion. That's one of the big parts. But it's also just the weirdness. Trump backed bad candidates in 2022 because he does stuff like makes his sons in charge of being loyal to him before he can be in his administration. And it's all the goofball stuff. If Donald Trump had the capacity to act normal between now and Election Day, he'd win in a landslide. Americans would love to have a normal president who they had confidence in the economy. It's just the weirdness.
Okay. All right. Well, it seems like a new state is mixed state, is a new hot spot for college-aged kids. A new article claims that, quote, kids are giving up on elite colleges and heading south. For example, Clemson University in 2023, that's in South Carolina, roughly 1 in 5 out-of-state students came from New York or New Jersey. What's going on there?
It's a subcontext to the voting with your feet. People want to go where they feel welcome. And if you're anything close to a conservative in New Jersey, you don't want to go to Princeton, right? If you're a conservative in Massachusetts, you don't want to go to Harvard. You want to go someplace where you're going to feel welcomed. It doesn't mean that you're sort of, well, I guess it probably does. It sort of means people are choosing to be with folks who sort of think the same way they do. But I don't think you think that when you're 18 years old.
It's more fun, too. Clemson's a lot more fun.
And it's warmer. I mean, I remember I didn't go to Princeton because I thought the girls were ugly, right? Of course, you do crazy things when you're 18 years old. But there is something about going someplace where you don't feel like you have to deal. Look at it this way. You're not seeing Clemson in the news right now for the riots.
This started with West Virginia University. West Virginia University was drawing kids to have fun in a cool place from these states long before Clemson. Clemson's late.
All right, hot mic
go Mountaineers.
Nick. By the way, today happens to be the one-year anniversary of The Hill on NewsNation. We launched this show just 12 months ago. No gifts.
No gifts?
Nope, no gifts. Just guesses here. You're going to sit on the sideline for this one because you were on the very first show.
Yeah, can't get rid of me.
The first guest 12 months ago on this show was, who do you think it was?
I have no idea.
Who do you think it was?
A congressman?
What do you think it was?
Mike Pence.
Oh!
You remember.
Did you know that?
You remember
us. Julia watches The Hill.
Don't try to get anything past me.
Just to show you where things have gone politically, Mike Pence, there you go, with Leland. First ever guest on this show. Headlines from our first ever show here on The Hill. Democrats are reluctant about Biden 2024, but they see no other choice. NBC News poll, 70% of GOP voters stand behind Trump amid indictment and investigation. So while some things have changed, some things haven't changed here on The Hill. Fantastic team who has been with us here for the years.
Bitter Tear hasn't changed at all.
It's amazing.
It's gotten better.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Speaking of bitter,
with that thing.
He's on the other side of the break. Leland joins us. He probably enjoys us too. You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation. Stay with us. All right, so before we say goodbye, here's a story that caught our eye. The Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg announced the Biden administration is cracking down on airline junk fees, which the administration says automatically requires airlines to give cash refunds if your flight is canceled or significantly delayed.
We're also eliminating hidden fees.